Lauren, this is Eric. Eric, this is Lauren.
It's so
Hi.
nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm not exactly entirely sure what we're doing today, but
Nobody is actually entirely.
oh, good. So I'm director of sustainability for Canon Design. We work on projects all across North America, and I have the best job in the firm because I basically just get to jump into every project team and do stuff, and then I've built out a bunch of sustainability experts within the firm. So and then slowly mentoring and training them to facilitate these conversations as well with clients. So that's my big role. And then I also teach at BAC in Boston, sustainable design program there. And then I write books. So I just put out here. This is the latest one.
Nice.
Are you more the big idea guy?
I'm a low touch, high value, as a buddy of mine used to say. I've got a bunch of passionate young people that want to contribute, and I know it'll take them longer, and they need to learn, so I just let them. That's as opposed to me dictating everything that they do. I'm trying to let go of my control freak side. Now that I haven't been able to fly for a year, it's been awesome because I never want to have to get on a plane again if I can help it.
That's exactly how I feel. I don't want to go back to the office. I don't want to travel. I love presenting remotely. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, fuck that. Who wants to get on a plane again?
Right. I right there with you. The time waste.
Have you been getting calls? Have either of you been getting calls about in-person presentations again? Or no?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. Are you going to do it or no?
Only if I want to go to the city. So I'm going to New York in October because I want to go to New York. So it's like, okay, I'll do that one. When
you present, you definitely use humor. Humor is the background for your idea sharing, I think, right?
Yeah.
And it's part of it's a little bit of like cynical shock value, because I remember that first presentation I saw that you did, you basically said, you were talking about toxins, and you said, because it doesn't make sense for an architect to kill their clients. This is why you shouldn't have toxins. Right, exactly. So that kind of
it's bad business decision, I believe is what I said.
Yeah. So that kind of provocative statement with that undertone of humor, do you feel that opens doors to you in a way, like people's mind doors,
It's there's an old comedian joke in there, which is like, well, you win more friends than you lose. Like it's that kind of thing. Here's what happened. In 2000 or so, 2001, I started doing more speaking and like actively choosing to do that.
Right.
And my first few talks were very serious because I'm like, this is a solemn subject. It's sustainability. It's serious. We're all dying. I need to talk about it. And I was but at the same time, I have a lot of comedian friends, and I was doing stand-up on the side. And so I had these two different parts of myself that weren't together and separate. And one time I was giving a talk, and I don't remember where actually, but it was early on, and I was reading the room, and people were falling asleep. They're not listening to me. And I was in a weird mood anyway. So finally, I just kind of said what was on my mind, and I just saw the reaction of the audience. Like they perked up and they started listening. They moved forward in their seats. Their head went forward. So for me, it was in a part to align the parts of my personality, because I'm generally a funny person that doesn't take much seriously. And then, but the other part was I saw the engagement would create, and then a remarkable thing happened is those funny analogies get remembered. So in part, it's because it's effective and it works, and also, it's a depressing thing. I used to be on the board of this conference called West Coast Green, that's now defunct, and Christy, who's the founder, who's this beautiful human, just a lovely person. Every conference ended with dancing.
Nice.
Right. So the whole conference ended with dancing. And why? Because what's a revolution without dancing? So So Lauren doesn't know that. So the other thing is I get bored very quickly. So every year I make a new talk.
My experience with you is basically anything that I could Google. So I've watched like your TED Talk, for example, and I was fascinated at the way that your brain worked during this particular talk. I loved, so to talk about the humor and the imagery, obviously you had the stick frame from like the 1800s that we're still doing the same exact way. And then you've really taken it to this super progressive place where you're talking about being able to, you know, grow the materials that we're doing. So this was an old talk by today's standards, right? Like, I mean, this was not last year. So I guess my first question is, you know, what, if any of this, have you started to be able to actually implement further than where you were during that particular TED Talk? And then what are some of the highlight reels that you're talking about today, and how has it changed?
Oh, well, sometimes it's to a certain, end. So I'll, like my 2021 talk, for example, in part, I want to talk about circular economy because I just wrote a book about it. And it's kind of top of mind, but it's not a circular economy talk, I don't think. In part, I want to talk about, the bulk of it is actually talking about, okay, well, now that we see the light at this end of this pandemic tunnel, what should we be doing? How should we be redefining normal and recreating the world? So some of it is opportunistic like that, but generally it's more like a comedian where it's, okay, what's pissing me off this year? What have I learned, or what have I been obsessed about? But in answer to your question, what's happened since that is, in one sense, a lot, and in another sense, nothing.
Yeah.
Which is frustrating. So the a lot part is, okay, after developing the XPrize and developing the requirements, then that led to developing a construction roadmap for all the XPrizes that need to be done. And we identified 20 different XPrizes that need to be done just in the construction field. And that was, and you can download the roadmap if you want. If you can't find it, I'll send it to you. But
I'm definitely going to.
And then after we did the roadmap, which took some time, and I learned a lot, I was like, okay, now can we do my XPrize? Like I very selfishly wanted my XPrize to launch. And then the executive director of XPrize left and was replaced with a new one, and she had all new priorities. And then I had to like get to know her. And then in the meantime, they said, well, would you work on this XPrize for regenerative communities that Pharrell is sponsoring? So it's like, oh yeah, I like Pharrell. And so then I worked on that. And again, I'm learning a lot. But it's like, okay, now can we do my XPrize? And then as recently as October 2019, I was at the XPrize Summit again, which is amazing. It's probably my favorite event ever, because you're in a room with just like the smartest, most brilliant people, and I feel like a moron in it. But that's the room. It's the room that I'm in. It's like, this is the room that I've always wanted to be in. Like that's what I always feel when I'm there. Mm-hmm. And so then in October 2019, we were discussing the Prostruction XPrize again, and getting it on the radar, and then the pandemic happened. And then and then by February there was rumblings about it. In March everything shut down, as you know, whatnot. But in the meantime, I also then kind of met more and more of the community, so becoming much closer with people like David Benjamin, who are using mycelium based bricks to grow parametric buildings, and just like amazing folks like that. And so I guess I've been making friends who are they're
maybe feather, like there's a lot of potential when you make those connections. It's just that you're probably ready to fly, as it were, right?
Yeah. And I've been logging it all in kind of a thing of like, okay, here are the potential partners that I can do with that. And so now I have this list of resources and partners and stuff. So that part's grown. But if you're asking me, are we any closer to like planting a seed in the ground and having it grow into a fully formed building that people can occupy? No, I don't think so. We've certainly learned a lot about synthetic biology. I have anyway. But no, I don't know. I don't think we're any closer yet, but we're trying.
One of the things that I've been struggling with is too many people are not willing to have ideas beyond what they know they can do. It kind of ties me back to the thought of now that COVID is now that we're seeing that we can emerge from COVID, so many people are saying, oh, I can't wait to return to normal. And I'm like, you're an idiot. Why would you, like, we learned that normal wasn't good in all these different ways.
Yeah.
What is there any particular thought from COVID that you see affecting buildings in a certain way going forward, or design in a certain way going forward?
At the beginning of the pandemic, Arundhati Roy wrote a beautiful poem called "The Pandemic is a Portal."
Ooh.
And here it is. So I'll put it in the chat. And it really struck me. And she did it in April, so it was like right at the beginning of the pandemic. So I mean, that's how brilliant she is, I guess. But basically, this is our opportunity to redefine what normal is. And I mean, unless you're a white guy, I don't see why anybody would want to return to normal.
So speaking as a white guy, that's pretty powerful to say that you can't even understand that. That's not even understandable from your perspective.
Yeah, but yeah, yes and no. I mean, certainly I'm very privileged for everything and grateful for it all, but also, you know, raised as a Jew who experienced a lot of anti-Semitism and you know, weirdness in my life. You're always kind of felt like you're a bit of an outsider that way. And then going through, you know, when I worked at Living Future and then at Eco Districts, that was kind of like a master's degree in understanding equity and its role in sustainability. So, okay, now we want to make these changes, and seeing how hard it was to do. You know, the Living Future board was all white folks.
Yeah. And
they got a lot of shit for it. And so, okay, well, let's change that. There's certainly plenty of qualified people of color that we could put on the board. And how hard it was to change some of that mindset. And then going over to Eco Districts especially was powerful because Rob, the founder of Eco Districts, he's just a great, wonderful human. And but he had pulled me aside and he's like, listen, this is going to be hard for you. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm flexible. He's like, no. He said, you have to bring a certain, you got to bring a certain level of humility to this work that I don't know if you have. And I'm like, I can be humble. And he's like, yeah, well, all right, let's see. But he guided me through it. But
that's cool. Actually.
He had undergone his own kind of transformation and understanding about it. And Eco Districts especially was still is the most diverse board I've ever worked with.
Nice.
The most diverse event that I've ever gone to. The one where we talked about equity in a way that was meaningful and powerful to everybody in the room. You know, so I was very fortunate to have that experience as well. You know.
Can I ask a couple of 101 questions for people who might be watching?
Sure.
So Eco Districts is what?
Oh, sorry. Eco Districts is a nonprofit. It started in City of Portland under their Department of Sustainability, but really was a framework for how do you develop regenerative, equitable, sustainable communities. And it's fascinating to me as an architect because normally, for the longest time, I saw each building as a problem to be solved, right? So we're designing this building. We're going to make it great and green and wonderful. But as soon as you kind of zoom out to a neighborhood scale or a district scale, it gives you certain opportunities and advantages that never even occurred to me before as an architect. For example, on your own, you might not be able to put in the most advanced or the most efficient heating and cooling system into one building. It might not pencil out, it might not make sense, but as soon as you zoom out, suddenly you can partner with your neighbors, you can get an economy of scale going, you know, the size of the systems works out better. So now instead of one building trying to solve all the world's problems, you've got 20 buildings, 30 buildings, whatever, working together to do that.
Okay.
It makes a lot more sense. And now you can apply that same thinking to what about issues around equity or resiliency. And so it becomes very fascinating. And then I joined Eco Districts at a very interesting time because they were just about to package up and roll out their certification process and their accreditation process. So, well, it's funny because one of the exercises I do now is this. I mean, on my end, I call it assumptions mapping. I don't usually call it that to them.
Right.
To them, but I do this thing where I go. So what are we putting into the project that we're not saying out loud?
Yeah.
Or something like that, depending on what it is. And so it's often things like, well, drywall. Well, why are we doing that? Well, because aren't we supposed to? Well, no. I mean, we need fire rated walls. We can make fire rated walls, but the other walls, why are we doing it?
Well, yeah.
And we start doing that to a certain degree, and we start laying out all these different assumptions that we're mapping out, and suddenly that becomes opportunities, because what happens is the maintenance people will chime in and go, well, I actually hate our floors, or I hate our base, or I hate our windowsills, or something like that. And as soon as I hear that as a facilitator, I'm like, say more about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm tugging at every pain point I'm tugging at, because those pain points become opportunities to inject sustainability. See, so I want to find the pain points, because the things that they're thrilled with, that's going to be harder for me to get them to change, right? If they love their elevators, great, I'm happy for you that you love your elevator, but I'm probably not going to convince you to change it. But if you hate your wall, or you hate your floor base,
Right.
or you hate your vinyl floors, great, I hate them too. Let's talk about that. And yeah, so pain is the spark of innovation.
I think that, sometimes pointing out the obvious and pointing at the pain with humor too makes the decision look so foolish that you couldn't possibly repeat it again, right? Or wrong?
In theory. Yeah, in theory, of course. One of the other tricks, I hate to say tricks because it sounds like I'm being duplicitous, but strategies, let's say, is a textbook Socratic method, where I'm asking them questions that I already know the answer to. I just need them to get there on their own. So, the questions about energy and carbon, I already know what the answer. I don't need the workshop to tell them where they need to be in terms of that. I need them to get there. So I'll use Socratic method questioning to do that. The other thing that I'll use is, and it's very effective, is I'll look at their competition. There's actually two types of competition. There's the competition that the company thinks they're in competition with, right? And who they might be. But then there's the competition they want to be in competition with towards sustainability, their publicly stated goals. And here's what you're doing. And that's very powerful.
You think we're at a point where there are enough people with carbon neutrality plans or sustainability plans that we can say that that's a normal approach, or do you think we're not there yet?
Oh, we're definitely there in terms of number. I mean, a quarter of the Fortune 500 companies have carbon neutrality plans. 100% of them have net zero energy plans. That's not the issue. The issue is that all their plans are wrong, for lack of a better word. Okay. Because a lot of them have 2040 and 2050 plans. And as we've been telling them, if you've got a 2050 plan, that's a today plan.
Yes.
You can't wait till December 2049 and like, oh, we better do something about it, which is what humans normally do. A 2050 plan needs to be put into action today, because at least 50% of the cuts, if not 80% of the cuts, need to be made in the next 8.5 years. So we were told to do a climate action plan, so we did one, and now it's on the shelf over there. See, it's dusty on the shelf.
Taking it a step further, so your initial reaction was, yes, the Fortune 500 companies are doing this, but I am a way different animal than a Canon design. I work with very much significantly smaller projects as an interior designer. And I work with a number of people where sustainability, even nuts and bolts sustainability, is just not even on their radar. So how do we get, what's my pull point? What's my strategy?
5 strategies.
You don't have one strategy. You'd have at least 5.
Clearly.
That's the trick of it. No, I mean, first and foremost, you'd have to explain to them that whether they want to acknowledge this or not, this is reality and it's happening and it's already affecting them.
Start with a resilience assessment.
We'll do a resiliency I call it a dashboard because I don't know what else to call it, but we'll do like a resiliency analysis
Mhm.
for that specific location.
Cool.
Because I want them to know, you know, hey, remember that hurricane from a few years ago? That's your new normal, that unpredictable, like you don't know when it's going to happen. That's your new normal. And these are the kind of the other stresses and shocks that are tied to that. So we do this kind of resiliency dashboard as a way to spur that discussion. So that way they know that this is your reality. And if you can choose not to have a climate action plan, that's fine, but it doesn't change the reality that you need one.
Second, show them only the right choices.
Number two, you know, it's funny because I've been in so many meetings over the years with architects and interior designers where they would tell me that they would show clients stuff and they would say, God, I hope they pick the green one. And I'm like, so let me get this straight. You're sitting in the meeting, you're offering them ideas, and you're secretly wishing, well, gosh, I hope they pick that one and not these. And they're like, yes. I'm like, okay, then why are you even offering the non-green ones?
Yeah.
Why aren't you only offering the stuff that you want to pick? That doesn't make sense to me. Well, because I think we're supposed to. Okay, well then why don't you actually have the conversation? What I've discovered is when I actually engage the school or the hospital or the facilities person or the office people or whatever about this material, and I ask them, why do you do this? They go, because we've always done it.
We've always done
And I go, do you actually like it? And again, it comes back to pain. Those pain points become opportunities to innovate. And so every school hates their vinyl floor. I hate vinyl because of different reasons. So if you hate it and I hate it, why are we even offering it? Let's find alternatives. Well, it's too expensive. Well, is it?
Is it?
Because your blood pressure is going up just talking about it, and your maintenance people have to take care of it, and it looks like poo, and on and on and on.
Third, redefine cost.
And so this is number 3 is then redefining cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I'm just done having these conversations where, you know, we're doing this now. We're working on several cancer facilities, and on all of them, I basically pitched the same idea of like, hey, can we agree not to put cancer-causing chemicals in the cancer facility?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Light bulb. Yeah, exactly.
And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. I'm like, great. But for one of them, and I won't say which one, the client, and you know, with the best of intention, right, said, what do you think it's going to cost us to not have these kind of traditional chemicals, these cancer-causing chemicals in the building? And we did a very quick analysis, and it was like I think it was $26,000.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, wow, $26,000. He's complaining about $26,000. In the same breath that he's complaining about $26,000, he literally turns in his chair to somebody else and says, hey, where are we with the $26 million parking garage that we're building next door? Is that done yet? That kind of thing. And it's like, that to me shows it's never been about the money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You're complaining about $26,000 to not have introduced cancer-causing, you know, chemicals in the building, but we're subsidizing free parking for everybody to the tune of 26 million. At that point, it's not about the money as much as it is priorities. And so that means that I failed to sell the priority of not putting cancer-causing chemicals in the building. And I guess GM or whomever has really, really sold them on, yeah, you got to provide free parking for everybody.
Fourth is consistent reframing.
Number 4 is really then reframing every single argument in that way. So
Yeah.
it's much more about expectation. So we redefine cost by essentially saying, okay, if we're going to do anything out of the ordinary, anything innovative or alternative, let's do a life cycle cost of it.
Right.
So I'm not comparing upfront to upfront. I'm comparing upfront to maintenance, operations, efficiency, repair, replacement, and then also adding non-financial things like comfort, user satisfaction, acoustics, you know, really focusing on the outcomes that I want from it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. That's great.
So that's what you need to do. I mean, you got to redefine cost. It's, you know, the large part of being a sustainability person today is reframing the argument.
Yeah.
And that's more important than anything. You know, it's funny because I meet these people that are like, I want to get into sustainability, but I don't know enough about, I don't know, green roofs or whatever. I'm like, first of all, you can read a book about green roofs. at your library for free. So that's not a problem. Number two, your skill that you need to develop is not a technical skill around green roofs. The skill you really need to develop is arguing and getting good at arguing with people. Because if I go head to head and you've got toxic building here and a building that's trying to do more here, of course, the building that's trying to do more will always appear more expensive up front. But if we're really reframing the entire argument of I'm giving you a better building and everything I'm doing has a payback,
Yeah.
it might not just be financial, it might be something else, then suddenly you're reframing the entire argument. And that's really what we're after here.
And lastly, focus on the outcomes.
And then number 5 is really focused on the outcomes. People are the biggest, most important, and most expensive part of every building, right? It's what we spend the most money on. And so I don't sell them on LEED. I don't sell them on solar panels. I don't, those are tools.
Right.
Those are means to an end. What I'm selling them on is outcomes. So we'll go through several outcomes and we'll say, which of these are important to you? And what would it mean to you to have these outcomes? And some of the outcomes are very precise. They're like, we're going to improve patient recovery times. We're going to improve student test scores. And they're tied to a baseline and a metric. And some people, their KPI and their bonuses are tied to those same outcomes.
Right.
So if we take this outcomes-based approach to sustainability, we can achieve the same thing. And the beautiful part is it doesn't get value engineered out. I'm not selling them on one thing. If I sell them on a green roof can get value engineered out. But if I sell them on, improving employee satisfaction, well, there's many ways to get there.
One of the things that we always ask, and I honestly cannot wait to hear your answer. The first is, we typically ask it is, who's your biggest hero right now? And I feel like so many people and hear so many conversations. I'm wondering who you think is one of the most relevant people that we should, not necessarily a hero, but that we should be tuning into, listening to, Twitter, wherever there are podcasts, whatever.
Oh,
what should we be tuning into other than you?
Besides you.
Because clearly you're one.
Oh, first of all the podcasts I listen to are comedians.
But you and Jody have this in common, and I feel like it's part of this quick wit that you guys have.
It's also like at the end of the day, everything we're dealing with is so heavy and numbers driven. So it's like when I relax, I want to listen to. So I listen to the Jason Bateman Will Arnett podcast, for example.
Oh, that must be so good. I've not listened to that.
So funny, right? It's just perfect for my dumb brain. So there's a guy named Will Srubar who's at, I want to say Colorado State, and Will, if I'm wrong, I apologize. But he's one of those people that's just doing those things around material science and health. And I'm just blown away by him and his colleagues and peers. There's people like Annie Bevan who I met her when she was at sustainability person at Superior Essex, which is a cable company, but they had the first redless-free cable, and we used it on Living Building Challenge projects. But that wasn't enough for Annie. And so now she just got made executive director of Mindful Materials. And so I'm really excited to see Mindful Materials take off. It's one of my favorite tools.
That's been like percolating for 10 years almost.
Yeah.
And now it can go. That's cool.
So now it can explode. I'm in, like everybody else in the Pacific Northwest, we're all in love with Stacey Smedley, who was at Skanska.
Great.
And at Skanska, she, for the client Microsoft, Skanska developed an embodied carbon calculator. And the way that I know the story, and Stacey, of course, probably will have a more humble version of this, but the way I get the story is Stacey said to Microsoft, hey, this is a cool calculator that we built for you. Do you mind if we share it with the world and make it open source? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. We're Microsoft, right? And so she did, and that became the embodied carbon construction calculator, EC3, which is now the main tool that we're using to track the embodied carbon in our buildings. And we're able to get to a level of detail that we couldn't get to before. And honestly, in about half an hour, I can cut the embodied carbon in a traditional building in half just by making smarter choices of the concrete, steel, and aluminum that go into it with that tool. Well, and then one more to add, just because I just spoke to her. and she's a dear friend of mine, is Sarah Neff, who's at Kilroy Realty. And it's interesting because Sarah, I always tease Sarah that she's got like an adult job, like a real job, because she deals with, portfolios and business people, and like she works on a lot of that kind of adult stuff. I'm just a kid drawing with crayons, but she's like an adult. But she's also incredibly funny and smart and whatever. And so she led Kilroy to be carbon neutral. It was the first developer their size to become carbon neutral. And they're profiting from it, right? They just had the biggest sale ever in California history in Mission Bay, a building that they built 5 or 6 years ago, now just broke the record for the largest sale ever. And it's, of course, a super green building.
And I might know the answer to this, but what's the biggest initiative right now? What should we all be focusing on, learning more about, and moving forward with in our day-to-day lives, or attempting to?
Well, this is hard because, on the one hand, as an architect and sustainability person, I'm interested in a lot of things. I'm interested in material health and its effect on indoor air quality and its occupants. I'm interested in water, which I feel has been kind of a little overlooked lately because of all the discussions around carbon. I'm interested in, urban communities and equity and resiliency and so forth. But then just because of urgency, the answer has got to be around carbon, and specifically the embodied carbon that goes into the buildings, which, we spent decades really fixated on operational energy. I mean, myself included. Right. And we're good at that, right? We can make very high performance, low EUI buildings that perform at a reasonable amount of energy that we can then offset with solar. What we're not so good at yet is, what about all the upfront energy that went into making that, the embodied carbon? And that's where these tools like EC3 that I mentioned, or Tally, really come into play, because we didn't even have them 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And now we're able to get a level of detail and understanding that informs the design process and our decision making. And so the embodied carbon is half the carbon story of the building, and we've largely ignored it up until recently. And because of the time value of carbon, in other words, because when you build the building, that's where all the upfront carbon is counted, and then the operational stuff, takes place over the next 50 years. Focusing on the embodied carbon is critical to achieving all of our climate goals. So we, just because of urgency, I have to say that's where our focus lies, right? Get into the embodied carbon of your building, and you don't have to be perfect. Just start tracking it, measuring it. Just start, and just have the conversation. The only other one to mention, just because it barely gets a mention, is refrigerants.
Yes.
And there was a book Paul Hawken did a few years ago called Project Drawdown, and refrigerants was like number 3 on the list of impactful things. And so now we've had some great conversations in the last few years around refrigerants, and the folks at ASHRAE and all those mechanical engineer nerds at ASHRAE have really been looking at the global warming potential of refrigerants. And we've been much more disciplined about checking, tracking, monitoring, and doing something about it. And it's an easy thing to do. It's a spec, right? It's a single spec you can do.
This has been Subject to Change, a sustainability podcast.
We really appreciate your time, Eric.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Inspiring, challenging, and clear. I mean,
oh yeah,
very clear. Sometimes we wander a little bit more. You brought us back to some real stepping stones for improved action, and I know that I'm gonna be keeping them in mind as I do work going forward, as a refresher on what needs to be done. And I'm sure Lauren too, and whoever watches, the 32 followers are going to be inspired by you.
Oh, great. Well, we could, there's only 32 of them. We could all go to a movie.
That's true. Once we can do that, spread out.
I'm vaccinated. I'm ready to go.
But will you fly to Syracuse or Albany? Maybe not.
Oh, no,
might not be cities you're interested in.
That's right. We know that with your name on our video blog, that will just amplify to thousands of people who are watching.
You might get 33.
We appreciate every single new lineup.
Yeah.
Well, it was my pleasure. It was great seeing you both. And thank you for having me.